Right, so this is it. Good. What is this? Well, it must be the sort of stable block farm sort of thing.
Here we came from Monmouth, which has its own charm, but it's always nice to see something charminger.
It's quite a funny thing, isn't it, to drive through Newport, particularly Newport in the rain, and then turn off suddenly and to see, here we are, this is sort of, like something out of a costume drama, I suppose. It's quite surprising that this is here in a way, isn't it? And I have to say, it is formidable, isn't it?
It's quite strong. And imagine tripping along here in your crinoline. Not a great idea.
If I'd known that's what you were into, Anna, I would have dressed differently. Here I am in my wet weather gear.
Yeah, me too.
Today's weather is, when I told people I was moving to Wales, I was told it was like this all the time.
Oh.
And now it really is. And it's proper rain, isn't it?
It is. That's what they said to me. Oh, you'll get real rain. But we had quite a lot in Scotland. It's not that terrible.
Right, let's head for the dry. Oh, the wind's up. Hello, I'm just going to cling to this umbrella. Hang on. I'm actor and writer Miles Jupp.
I'm his friend Anna Antebi, and this is
Meet Me at the Museum. Okay, right, let's get our tickets, hopefully free. Let's just see, this is the sort of box office bit.
This is the way into the...
Right, you go first, Anna.
Okay.
Seems wise.
And go.
Hello there.
Hello.
Hello. We'd like to look around the house, please. But also, we have national art passes.
Got the passes, yes.
OK, great. You've got free entry today with your National Art Pass. Entry is just through the doorway there. And enjoy your stay with Tredegar House.
Thank you very much indeed.
Have a nice day.
Smashing. We know each other because we're neighbours. We
Yes.
live about 30 feet across the road from each other.
With a lot of traffic in between.
With a lot of traffic in between. I blame the town council.
Don't we all?
But yeah, but I've lived where I live for 4.5 years. How long have you been there?
5.
Okay, and so where were you before that?
I was in South Devon, right on the edge of the sea.
And was there an erosion issue? What drove you further inland?
There was an erosion issue, but it was very personal. I became 80 plus, and I thought, this is time. I can no longer manage the uneven ground, the large garden, the 700-year-old cottage, and it was my daughter who found my property in the town, a little Georgian terrace house, and I would say that moving to Wales at this stage of my life was fate working for me.
But also, this is we say we've never been to Tredegar House, but we've never been on an outing before.
No, we haven't. We haven't.
Come to our house for lunch.
No.
We've been to yours. Your dog plays with my children vivaciously, but we've never been. This is our first.
This is our first outing together,
and we couldn't have picked a more terrifying, treacherous day for it.
Absolutely, but there will be compensations, I feel sure.
Okay.
It was quite a splendid facade, at least.
And what do you think? Looking from the house, what do you imagine we're going to see today? What sort of things do you think we'll encounter?
I think we're going to get a feel for the time that the people lived here. And I think that's a very important thing. You can get transported by an environment, and I think this one will do it.
What would it have been like in the interwar years or something like that? Anywhere big owned by rich people was presumably just wild parties.
I think the rich people was very much a thing. It was only a section of the community that got to experience living in these houses.
This isn't the 1%, is it? This is sort of hyper rarefied.
Very rarefied, yes. What it must have been in the imagination of the people who didn't share it must have been really quite strange.
Well, now you can still walk up the drive, you can show your art pass or whatever it is and come in.
And you're in. Then it must have been like in The Wizard of Oz being in the strange country.
Yeah, and now we get here, it's just a man behind a curtain. I think that is something that is easy to forget, isn't it, about visiting anywhere. This would have been, it's just somewhere with high walls that you didn't know anything about. So just that sort of complete mystery. And
another world.
And now a couple of oiks like us can just sort of wander about and treat it as our own.
Oikish.
Yeah, it's fun, isn't it?
Absolutely.
After you, Anna.
Thank you, sir.
In case it's not safe.
I can fall on you, that's all right.
This where we are suddenly is the main entrance. This will be the first thing you'd see when you approach. You see out there, there's glorious gates
Those
there.
gates are wonderful.
That's heavily gilded. Yeah. That's quite a grand approach to a house, then, isn't it? And lots of things get filmed here. Lots of TV dramas and stuff. But perhaps most excitingly, Antiques Roadshow, I believe, has been filmed here, Anna.
There you are. Yes, Antiques Roadshow. Interesting. There is a bit too much emphasis on money, but there we go.
Well, it's Bruce, you see. She's an absolute breadhead.
Brucey.
This is a hall that we're in, which is completely sort of splendid, panelled, very high. I know we're quite early on in proceedings, Anna, but I am already have reached the limit of my knowledge. So what I thought we might do is see if we can find someone that could explain a little bit more about it to us. If you think that's a wise idea.
I think it's a splendid idea, and I need it more than you.
Hi there, can I help?
Hi, yes, that'd be lovely. We're just looking around and we don't know anything.
Fill us in.
Well, you're very welcome. My name's Emma. I'm an interpretation officer here at Tredegar House, and we can start in the state rooms, if you like, because those were the most impressive rooms here at Tredegar House, and were built to show off, basically, all the money and pizzazz that the Morgan family had.
Great, well, let's start there and then work down.
Okay. We ought to have perhaps a financial advisor with us.
So anything that hasn't got a red dot on it, that's still for sale, is it? Is that how it works?
Well, the Morgan family were one of the wealthiest families in South Wales, the second wealthiest family in South Wales.
Where did it come from, the money?
Land, basically, and very, very sensible marriages.
Right.
They married heiresses and got more land and more money. And the main house that we're in now was built in the 1670s, but there was an older house here from about the 1540s onwards, and there's still some of that house within the bigger structure.
So how big a family would they have been, though, in those days?
There would have been lots of sort of branches off it and various siblings and so on, but the main Morgan family were quite close-knit and quite small in terms of numbers, not necessarily size.
But so the decision then to suddenly build a house like this would have been taken by how many people?
Just William Morgan himself, Sir William Morgan. He was extremely wealthy. His decision to build this house was very much a statement of his wealth. Red brick houses like this just didn't exist in Wales, and not very many of them survive at all anywhere in the UK, which is why this is known as one of the best restoration houses left. But he also, as well as spending his money on the structure of the house, he spent it on the inside of the house as well. So this fantastic, beautiful room that we're in now, the Brine dining room, as you can see, we have all these very intricate carvings around the walls, and this was the main dining area in those days. So you would come in through the door, as you've just done, and be presented through here, and presumably your immediate reaction would be, wow.
What is the most unusual thing in this room?
Oh, well, there's two or three things. The carvings I've already mentioned. A lot of the faces of the carvings are thought to be representations of people of the time or people that they knew previously. Just to the right of the fireplace, you can see a little figure that looks a little bit like a mouse, and that is said to be based on the face of Charles I.
Was he particularly mouse-like, Charles I?
Well, he was thought to be a little bit timid in a certain degree, wasn't he?
Mouse-like and wooden.
He did visit Tredegar, the older house that existed here, and we can show you the doorway later that he is alleged to have walked through.
He walked through a door?
He did, I know, amazing.
Can I see the wooden thing? Can you point to where is
yes.
this door-walking monarch?
Just here. You can see he's got rather a arched
yes.
nose, like Charles was thought to have.
It's got
had as well.
whiskers.
It does, yes.
Yeah.
We think that the carver was trying to make a little joke at his expense.
Twitchy mouse face, yes.
Indeed.
That could also be a sort of Peter Brook, the cartoonist in the Times, who does this. That has that sort of. How old is that? Because it has a sort of quite a modern look to it.
It's 17th century. The carving is here original from the 1670s.
And has that nose been slightly damaged?
I think it's been a lot of people over the years touching it. The other extraordinary thing about this room is actually the floor itself. It's one of the top 10 floors in the whole of the National Trust's care.
Is that you?
It is oak.
Oak.
And actually, if you look closely, many of the panels are all one plank of wood. They're actually
They're from tall trees, aren't they? They
Yes.
are. They run from one Goodness, this is a long room, and they run from one end right to the other.
It's said that it was an oak tree from the estate itself, and that all of the wood came from the same oak tree. We don't know how true that is, but certainly, as you can see, many of the planks are just one continuous length.
And that is done. That's just perfectionism, isn't it?
Yes.
That's him saying, I don't want
The
you to know
best.
just any old planks. I want planks that can go from one end of my really long dining room to the other end of my really long dining room.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I want a door that a king's walked through. That's what I want.
With a fleece, yeah.
I was just noticing that there must be a well-stocked cellar.
Yes, indeed. The Morgans were very hospitable. And Sir Charles Morgan, who owned the house from the early 19th century until the 1840s, he was particularly renowned for his 2 weeks of feasting over Christmas, which would culminate in Twelfth Night balls. And this display that we have here of wine bottles is to show that he spent £82 and 14 shillings in 2 months on wine. And as you can see, we've also pointed out that a collier or a mine worker on his land would have earned £1 and 7 shillings a week in comparison.
How well do you think they all got on then?
Debatable.
Right.
With a bottle between them, they were probably quite well.
Well, yes, perhaps.
I'm glad he had parties though as well. I think if you've got a house like this and you don't have people round occasionally.
Yeah,
You're,
it does get a little bit.
I think it's quite strange coming to this house as neighbours as we are, and then you think one of the things that stands out about a house like this is it's entirely on its own. Where we live in a small town. There's people either side of you. There's people in front of you. You know, you're surrounded by people. There's people. The very nature of a house like this, it's a completely sort of standalone property. And I don't know if that is actually a virtue, or if there's something about it that's kind of unsettling or unsavoury. The thought of there not being people living near you, I think, seems quite weird.
Well, personally, I've tried both. And different times of my life, I've wanted different things. I have to say that because of my age, I was born the year that Hitler came to power, and I was evacuated, and I was an only child. So I didn't feel the warmth of people around me very much in my childhood. So I've been trying to make up for it, and quite well, really. It's been good, but as they say, what doesn't kill you makes you strong. So those early experiences were very beneficial to me.
Where were you evacuated to?
Keswick. What a lovely place to be evacuated to. I had a good war. I was 6 when it broke out. I wanted to be away from other humanity in my early years, but I have learned the value of closeness of community since my family have left. And I'm really alone, but I'm not alone because I have neighbours and friends and that proximity. And that's what I love about terrace houses as well, especially Georgian ones. They're so well built. You hear very little noise, but you get a lot of the warmth, emotional and engineering-wise, from the other houses. You feel people around you, and I like it, but that's because I'm an old lady.
Well, I've got all this ahead of me, of course. But the idea of being sort of isolated like this seems quite strange to me, quite foreign. And you think, I kind of wonder about what the mental impact that would have on, if it would encourage really extrovert behaviour or the reverse, you suppose. You know, you get sort of cut off from the world.
Yes. We
can walk around and read The Guardian on our mobile phones and whatever, and it's all just there. But you'd be super cut off, I'd have thought, living in a house like this.
All right, shall we move on to the next room, the gilt room? That's even more impressive than this one.
Here we go.
So this one, if this was to impress you, this was to impress you 10 times more.
So that one there, that's the dining room.
Yes.
We've just come through. This goes sort of beyond.
Yes, this would have been
You
your
have to walk, because you have to walk through the dining room to get to this one.
Exactly.
What does it mean,
This
therefore?
was a withdrawing space, a music room. But this room, as you can see, covered in all of the beautiful gold leaf and gilt that was here, was designed to impress. And we've got low-level lighting in here because that's what it would have been originally. So you can imagine by candlelight how much it would have glimmered and shimmered and was really set to impress.
And then it's all gone a bit sort of eyes wide shut. There's these what are these sort of fabulous masks?
Well, we know that masked balls were very much a key to some of the Christmas celebrations that took part here. And in fact, we still have cast lists that the Morgan family produced for the various characters that they portrayed in these masked balls. And we have some masks here for visitors to try on so they can have a little bit of a sense of what it was like to be here during one of these masked balls.
When you see the characters, would you be asked to take on a character when you arrive from us? Would you arrive and be given a sort of
Yes,
part?
that would have been a lot of the families that would have come at Christmas, would have been third orange seller or peasant boy or other such slightly dubious phrasing that we wouldn't use these days.
Yes, and you were to take your mask off at midnight.
Yes.
But it was about, you could conduct all sorts of flirtations behind the mask, I think. And I have to confess that I met my husband at a masked ball.
Really?
Yes, he didn't know what he was getting. Yeah, I did.
That is brilliant.
I know.
That is absolutely fantastic. More details, please?
No, absolutely not.
So I'm, for instance, I don't know what character this would be in a masked ball. I shall look like Burglar Bill because I've got a flat cap on.
Ooh la la.
I look like a sort of Mexican wrestler. Okay, so I've got on this sort of slightly fabulous red thing. It's got sort of gold detailing about the eyes. It is. You do feel instantly different with something like that on, don't you? I can
As
understand.
if you're sitting in a gondola in Venice.
Yeah, and actually liberated in some way. If you wore one of those for 2 weeks at one of this Morgan man's parties, you'd feel, goodness knows where your sense of identity would drift to.
Yes. There is a feeling of mystery about a mask and a certain amount of deception, but that's fun. It's very interesting how people relate money and social status to arts, all the arts, which is a great pity because I remember a few years ago, people were complaining go to the opera, it's far too expensive. And Covent Garden offered a free night and advertised it. Nobody turned up because it wasn't about the money. It was about something else that was stopping them from doing it. Perhaps adverse comments from their neighbours and friends, she's getting a bit above herself, and all that sort of stuff. But it wasn't the money. Money was not the thing that stopped them.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah.
I mean, presumably if you go to the opera, you do have to sit next to some awful people.
Oh, ghastly.
Some
But
unbearable
I wouldn't say
people
that in front
covered in furs and with big, their
Those-
cigarettes in holders,
all of that.
diamante glasses.
I think also, looking back on my childhood, and my parents knew nothing of these things. Absolutely nothing. My paternal grandfather was a Dutchman from Scheveningen, and he had no education at all, poor education, but he had an eye. And he knew what was what, he really did. And so you don't have to have the educational background. All you have to have is the interest and the fascination and being rewarded once by a good feeling when you look at something or hear something or touch something that can set you off on the road.
This is one of the bells in the house that still works. So we have a bell panel, which we will take you through as well.
So one of us could look at the bell panel and one of us could ring it and we could
Yes,
see it.
exactly.
How does the bell like this? Is it
You
the dial?
Yes. You
Clockwise?
just pull it down.
There was a noise it made when I did that. That made me very frightened.
An entry to
So
a
that-
secret passage.
Yeah, the fireplace will slide back. There'll be a whole load of people wearing only masks. Well, right next to the fireplace, so what, you'd ring it if you were panicking? Could
Or you
set
just
fire
ring
to
it
something?
for a servant to come and make you a cup of tea or whatever you need.
Or if a friend came round, you could say, watch what happens when I ring this bell, and you press it, and a servant comes in and you go, look at that, I don't need you, it's fine. Yeah, amazing. These sort of bells, when the house my family lived in the 1990s, had an old bell like this, so it went up. So outside, you pulled the cord, and it went up, went through, there's a pulley, and it went all the way along the hill, and that's where the bell rang.
Yeah.
And that was really good, because if you were stuck on the phone for a long time, you could reach up and twang it and go, oh, I'm sorry, there's someone at the door.
absolutely de rigueur.
Oh, that's the door. I'm so sorry. Yeah, lovely chatting. No,
Absolutely.
I'll tell you what, Anna. If I'm going to go and look for the bell. If you ring this now, and then
Right.
I'm going to run through and see if I can hear it ringing because I'm ludicrously excited by this sort of stuff. I know we're basically treating this fine house as a soft play centre.
Shall I do this? Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, and I'm going to say
Like a
now, and I'm
bat
going
out of hell.
like a bat out of hell. I'll be gone when whatever it happens. Okay, cool. Okay, go. Right, I'm just going to run trot through there. Are you ringing? Is she ringing? Is she ringing? Where's it going? Where's it go? Gosh, it's a very long cable. Oh, there we go. Hang on, and Anna, ring the bell. Your Anna, it rang. Thanks for indulging me. You're allowed to come through now.
This is called Bell's Passage for
why?
obvious reasons, because we have lots of bells, which you can see just above you. This would have been one of the busiest areas of the house because all of these bells above our heads were connected to different rooms in the house. You can see some of the names underneath them. King's room, Lord Tredegar's bedroom.
Chintz dressing
Chintz
room.
dressing room, exactly. I'm sure you
Pink
have one of
dressing
those
room.
yourself. Yes.
Yes, library.
Visitor's
Side door.
bathroom.
But
yes.
what, would you stand in here waiting for a bell to ring? Or if you saw one ringing, you'd go, Ian, the King's room.
Well, a bit
Mary,
of both,
someone's
actually.
needed in the blue room.
Well, you can see as well that each of the bells are slightly different sizes, so they'd have different sounds, but also the pendulum at the bottom of them would move continually for about 5 minutes afterwards. So even if you weren't here in Bell's Passage, but you heard a bell, you'd run to here, see which pendulum was moving, and that would tell you which room was
That is
requiring
clever,
assistance.
isn't it?
So these were all mechanical bells, and then in the early 20th century, as you can see from the panel over here, they were all electrified. So they continued with the bell system, but simply by an electric process.
Where's the romance?
Oh, I see, and then it stays, so it doesn't need the swinging pendulum there. It
Exactly,
goes,
so it
rings, and you
would-
go down.
You can see one of them is white because that would have shown which
That was the
particular
last
one.
bell that was rung.
Emma, have you got an artefact which really touches you and is your favourite?
Yes, I do actually, and I happen to have it in my pocket, which sounds quite unusual, I know, but I'm going to show it to you now.
Who caught you in the act of trying to steal your favourite
No,
item?
actually, it's the front door key.
Ah, it's wonderful.
And
Is
we
that still a working lock?
It is. We use this key every morning and every night to lock up. And if you'd like to hold it, you'll see it's not
bet
the
it's
original.
warm.
It is warm because it's been in my pocket, but it's still very heavy. Now, as you can see, the key is probably bigger than half a foot. It's a lovely pewter key. It's got a very intricate shape at the top, a little bit like a club from the suit.
Trefoil.
Yes, indeed. That's probably the better name for it. And it's very grey and heavy, but would have been the original key that was used here.
There's only one of those. That is the one.
For the main door, but we do have other doors within the house that we obviously lock as well.
But if
the
you took
main
that
lock-
along to Timpson's and said, can I get one of these?
Yeah, I think there might take a little bit of time to copy this one.
Right.
It's not the original 17th century key, but it is 18th or 19th century key that the Morgans, or certainly the butler, would have used in the front door that you came in.
And now you are the Chatelaine.
Well, on certain days. But yes, this is my favourite object because I just love the fact that we still use the same key.
Wonderful.
And there's definitely something to be said about the privilege of being in a house like this at times when visitors aren't here, or early morning getting it ready to wake it up for visitors, and at the end of the day and walking through some of the corridors and imagining all the different people that would have been here.
Well, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you. Is there somewhere else you'd recommend that we went?
Yes, certainly. You've still got to see the bedrooms upstairs, so I would recommend that you make your way up the grand staircase, and my colleague Paul will meet you upstairs, and he'll be able to tell you a little bit more about some of the more recent family members that lived here.
So go to a bedroom, ask for a man called Paul.
Yeah, you got
Right,
it.
Not
okay.
3 times at us before. Yes. I wouldn't sleep a wink in here.
Hello. Hello. I'm Miles. This is Anna. We were.
Hello.
Hello, I'm Paul. I've been here a while. I'm part of Emma's interpretation team now. But I've been interested in these Morgans for many, many years. So I hope we're
I
going to have a
see.
chat about
And
it.
so this is whose bedroom is this then that we're in then? Which of the Morgans?
Well, this is the last one to live here full time. The most eccentric one of all, Evan Morgan. who was a bit of a shock to the estate, to be perfectly honest. Imagine if you're used to hunting, shooting, fishing, military Lord Tredegar, then this chap comes along who doesn't like any of that, but likes art, music, poetry and parties.
Oh, right.
It was a bit of a shock.
He sounds all right, doesn't he?
Yes, all right. He's interesting. Yes.
So 1930s, late 30s, this was his bedroom.
Oh, okay.
So you've got the four-poster, which in Evan's time might well have a snake wrapped around one of the posts.
A real
he had
one?
a real one. He had an anteater tied up in the corner of the room. He had an enormous macaw called Blue Boy in here as well. And if his party was a little dull, that was fatal, because he would think nothing of releasing his pet dog-faced baboon Bimbo to charge through the house to liven things up.
Oh, my word.
Splendid chap. Interesting.
You'd have fitted in well, would you, Anna?
Oh, absolutely. He told it like it was.
He used to walk around in extraordinary gear get-up. He wore capes, he had a snuff box. He once offered H.G. Wells some of his snuff and it almost blew his head off. He was an extraordinary character. But when his dad died in 1934, Evan got the great stage here. He was a bit of a fantasist. He got the key to the toy box.
Yeah.
He threw parties here then.
So who would have been the guests at these parties?
Well, firstly, if you didn't mind birds and animals and a little bit of scandal, because if these walls could blush, they certainly would.
Right.
But it's people like H.G. Wells, it's people like Aldous Huxley, Augustus John, and if we move over here, we've got a photo of one of them. We're taking you into the corner of the room. We've got a lot of photos here, but one of them shows Evan outside with one of his sort of tamer animals, which is his Great Dane Rollo, and he's there with Prince Philip's first cousin, the King of Greece, Prince Paul as he was then.
Yeah, goodness me.
But you never knew. I mean, if you're lucky, you meet Prince Paul or H.G. Wells. If you're unlucky, it could well be one of his animals that escaped. Because he had his own private zoo, and Mr. Pitt ran the zoo, who Evan called Pitt the Younger. And whenever there was a problem, maybe the gorilla got loose or the monkey, Pitt had to be called to save the day. But most people thought Evan would release the pets just for mischief anyway.
Is this him?
Yeah.
Is that what? Is that a House of Lords or something? What's
Yeah, we've got a portrait here of Evan looking as if he's a conventional Lord Tredegar.
He certainly does.
He's wearing his robes, but there's a wonderful story of when two Americans were here, and they were dining here, and they were pestering Evan all the time. You're at the coronation. Could you wear your coronation robes? And Evan said, oh, no. But by the end, he agreed. He said, I'll tell you what, you go at the foot of the great staircase. As I'm coming down the staircase, I will sweep down and you can get your cine footage. As he went down, he opened his robes. I'm afraid that's all he was wearing. What happened to the film is hopefully destroyed, but we don't know.
Oh, don't say hopefully.
They said of Evan, he could do anything with birds. I mean, everywhere he went, he carried birds. I mean, you've seen the picture of Blue Boy, but the one story that sums up this man more than anything else, I think, is when he picked up a little Australian parakeet at Tame Market, and he was told no one could control it. Well, that's a challenge. Absolutely. Evan bought it, and within a month, he taught it to crawl up the inside of his trouser leg and poke its head out through his fly buttons at parties. So
Now that must have raised a titter.
well, yes, absolutely. He wanted to shock value. He always went for the shock value.
Have you had a wild period in your life, do you suppose?
My whole life has been mildly wild.
Mildly wild.
Yeah, mildly wild. No, it's been very difficult within the framework of being married and always considering the fact that one must not disturb a professional's reputation, so one had to curb some of one's...
Baser instincts.
Oh, yes.
Right. Because you used to do, like me, I say obviously, it's very arrogant to me, I'm involved in sort of theatre and stuff like that and comedy and stuff,
Yeah.
but that's you. I mean, you used to run a deli, didn't you? But you also did. You used to be
before the deli. Yes, I was very involved with the theatre in Scotland, and quite by chance, I went along with a cousin to an audition that she was interested in and I wasn't, and finished up with 22 costume changes in that show. But it was mainly comedy, and it was wonderful review, and it was wonderfully written, and I need that. I couldn't do the stand-up stuff. I couldn't do that. Wonderful sketches written by great writers of the time, Noel Coward and his ilk, and then further on, the more modern writers, but all brilliant writers, with such a finger on the social situations.
Would this be in sort of louche kind of drinking venues, or what sort of places would they be?
Theatres, dear.
Proper theatre. I beg
With
your
a
pardon.
proscenium, of course. Keep the distance between the audience and the performers.
A thrust.
For self-defence.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Right, is that a radiogram over there?
It is, yes. Do you want a closer look at it?
Yes. Well, we had one in our house, not quite like that. Have you got a vinyl that you could put on it, and does it work?
It's probably seen better days, in all honesty.
Oh, well, fair enough. Haven't we all?
Okay, well, perhaps we'll just need to use our imaginations.
You can imagine the music that came from it in that era.
Oh, can I not?
Yes, well, Evan didn't really need it because the musicians were here playing live. I mean, Ivor Novello, Sir Thomas Beecham, that sort of crew. So, live music.
Live music, indeed.
Oh, Paul, where next?
Well, we're going to have a look in Evan's bathroom, which is pretty colourful as well.
Right.
So do follow me.
I've already got an idea. He's got a freestanding bath. There'll be an armchair in there, carpeted.
He's pretty good, you know.
This is a proper bathroom.
Serious bathroom. Good Lord.
Oh, there we go. Look at that.
Look at that. Look at the height of that cistern. God, it had...
Oh, there's nothing that wouldn't clear.
It is a plumbing challenge.
That's what you call a fall in plumbing.
That is... So is this all original here? We've got this loo that's... I don't know if we're allowed to... It's got... Look at that. Oh, that's old loo paper. So even in a fancy house like that, the loo paper would have been that sort of tracing paper unpleasantness.
Oh, yes. Shining on one side.
Yeah. Yeah, not recommended. Look at this. You're right. This cistern is very... Sorry to come alive just because you showed us an old toilet, but look at this. That I've never seen a cistern at such height, and you think you've been around the world a bit. That's incredible. Should I give it a tug? Oh, that is not plumbed in. There's nothing original in here, is there? Stop. This toilet is historic and is not plumbed in. Oh. Luckily, the horse hasn't bolted before that particular stable door was shut. But look at this, like being a sort of spa hotel, isn't it? You've got all your lovely unctions, is that what they're called? Unguents?
Unguents, yeah.
So you've got this very, very sort of ornate, well, everything really, sort of marble thing.
In my youth, plenty of people had those wash basins, and there was a jug with a base, the thing that stood on it, a big jug of water, but you didn't have running tap water. Not hot, anyway.
It's glorious, this.
I didn't realise how old I was. Good God. When I was evacuated during the war to Keswick, and there was no running water in the house, and Molly used to bring a big jug of water and fill the basin, and once a week there was a tin bath in front of the fire, and everybody used it, and you went down the path to the loo. And life was very much like this. And I'm appalled to think that all that has happened in a time, and I can hardly remember it. I can remember it, but it's this place has been such a reminder of that time. I know we're talking about the autocrats, the aristocracy, but there was the other class of group of people, and they lived like that, and it was familiar to me. I don't know that I'm happy about that, but there you are.
Is that Evan there in the rather extraordinary portrait? Is that where he himself had it?
He was a bit of a fantasist. So when you see this extraordinary painting, you've got Evan dressed to serve the Pope. And he's got St. Peter's in the background and an angel on his shoulder. Now, the iconography tells us a lot, because that is how you paint popes.
Oh, I see. Right. So he's got it bad, hasn't he?
Evan was a chamberlain to the Pope. The Pope didn't know about these parties.
What did he do for the Pope then?
Well, he was a papal chamberlain, which meant that for about a month of every year he lived in the Vatican. And it was a ceremonial thing. I think the money he gave the church helped, right?
I bet you he must have fed quite a lot of money into the system.
And he got a grand uniform, like you can see in the painting.
Yes.
But when George V and Queen Mary made a state visit to the Vatican, it was Evan who met them on the steps. When Chamberlain and Halifax, just before World War II, it was Evan who met them on the steps. So this bizarre individual was in the centre of all these things.
Wow. Sounds vaguely Trumpish to me.
Oh, do you? Oh, dear. We're going to fall out, I think. Evan did like a bit of gold.
There you go.
I think it's safe to say. So there he is.
So he had this role at the Vatican, but also he was an occultist, wasn't he?
Ah, yeah. You've put your finger on the one contradiction. No, perfectly. In fact, he wanted to be a priest at one time, but he used to take people of the British Diplomatic Corps into the Protestant cemetery in Rome to try and contact Shelley by doing a black mass over his grave. So you're right. I mean, I don't know if either of you, have you heard of a man called Aleister Crowley?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I haven't.
You haven't. He sort of comes and goes. I mean, today Crowley has devotees. David Bowie went through a Crowley phase he regretted. Jimmy Page is still going through his, and he regrets nothing.
Right.
So he was known as the Great Beast and the wickedest man in the world. Think of a cult leader.
Oh,
Not the sort of person who'd rock up at the Vatican.
Something in life, definitely.
But Crowley came to the parties here. And in his diary, he actually writes something very worrying that you wish the Pope wouldn't read. And I wish the Pope wouldn't see that painting because it's a bit cheeky as it stands. But in his diary, he writes 1943. He turns up at Newport Railway Station. The Great Beast gets off at Newport. And then he writes, he stays here. Evan put me in the bedroom where hanging Judge Jeffreys used to sleep. So only the best guests here. And then he writes, Evan showed me his magic room. Far greater than I'd imagined. I left before any harm could be done.
Quite like the idea of Crowley at Newport Station. You'd have to have his sort of powers to be able to work out where the upper crust was, wouldn't you? Well, of course, it's platform between 3 and 4, isn't it? The upper crust?
I suppose
right
it
at the
is.
You've got to know where it is or you won't find it.
It's been a wonderful time. Thank you for your time. Really very interesting. And where would you suggest we close?
Well, you shouldn't go really without trying out our shadow puppets with our shadow puppetry downstairs. I'd try that next.
Okay.
Right, this must be the place. Here we are, look at that.
Yeah,
That's
look
a
at
lovely old theatre box. Look.
Oh.
These are little figures. This must be for...
Oh,
look, they're these beautiful
behind there
silhouettes.
and
Right.
do shadow puppet.
Yeah, that's great. Yes, look at this. So this is a proper shadow puppet theatre. This is about the size of a sort of passport photo booth. It's all backlit. It's got red velvet. It's got tassels. Who doesn't like tassels?
Who
Right.
doesn't like tassels?
Right. So you stand there, Anna. I'll do one of my shows. Look. So where does the light? Presumably that's me. Does it come
You
to me?
could do a duck or a rabbit, couldn't you? But look! Oh, it's wonderful. It's real shadow. I've never seen one before. A shadow puppet theatre. That's fantastic.
Yeah. So what I reckon I can do, Anna, if I hold this one, it's meant to be a reindeer.
It's splendid. Gosh, can't you imagine your children having such fun with this?
Look, I can make a centaur. He probably had a centaur, didn't he, Evan Morgan? Probably get the Pegasus. I just like the opportunity to walk around somewhere like this and sort of see life through the eyes of completely different people, because I find it very sort of vivid in a way. You walk around and you see things, and you can imagine people. I don't know, things that I would never do, but that sort of coming back after a hunt or something like that, or crowding around a fireplace to have sort of hot whiskies brought to you, or sort of ringing bells and baths being filled up and stuff. There's a sort of, sort of sense of being able to sort of wander about in a costume drama for the morning and afternoon.
It's not alienating in any way. Involving.
No, because you can come here and you can walk around, and maybe he was that was a man who was able to have a kangaroo that he put boxing gloves on and had a fight against. But we can just sort of walk around his bedroom and stuff. It's just there now. The sort of family that owned this sort of place. That's all. That's all gone now.
Must be preserved because it's continuity, and so much of life is breaking up that continuity becomes more and more important to give a people a sense of where they belong in time and place.
And also that thing where the people that work here are very just steeped in it. You know, we bumped into two people today that absolutely sort of live and breathe every aspect of this.
Enthusiasm in people is so infectious, isn't it? I mean, when you see people who tell you something and their eyes are lighting up while they're telling it, marvellous.
That's what you want.
It was absolutely terrific. It was an adventure. It was a discovery. It was just delightful. I enjoyed every minute of it and shall remember it for a long time. I hope I get a long time to remember it. Great.
We should have more of these outings, don't you think?
We will. I don't know. People will talk.
Thanks for listening to Meet Me at the Museum with me, Miles Jupp.
And me, Anna Antebi, at Tredegar House here in Newport, South Wales.
If you like this episode of the podcast, please rate, subscribe, or tell a friend.
Don't forget, if you've got a National Art Pass, you can get free entry or discounts on museums all around the country.